Joining me now is Sarah Stewart, a fellow at the National Security Institute. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump's trade agenda really suffered a major blow today, and I'm really interested in getting your perspective on it, especially because you served as a Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court struck down a large swath of President Trump's tariffs, and they ruled that he did not have the authority to invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to impose those Liberation Day tariffs. So to start off the conversation, what are your thoughts on the ruling?
I think that the ruling is historic and it was unequivocal in that there was no carve-outs or exceptions for tariffs of this nature, but it's not the end of the story. And I think that this is an important part for listeners. Number one, it was silent on the issue of whether there will be refunds. And so I know a lot of importers and businesses are really thinking about how are they going to get their money back. So that's still an open question. And the second piece of this is there are other authorities that the president can use, and the administration has had months now to think about what those authorities are. And I believe just a few minutes ago, the president and U.S. Trade Representative Greer actually talked about the fact that they will be using a new authority called Section 122, and that will go into effect imminently.
And I want to talk about some of those authorities because President Trump, in that press conference you mentioned, just happened a few moments ago. He's not happy with this ruling, but he said that there's powerful alternatives. And I want to discuss what they are and what this really means for the state of tariffs as we know them right now, because the tariffs and their implementation really have been riddled with uncertainty from the start. And I want to talk about where they are and what they look like right now, because President Trump, he said that Section 232 and Section 301 tariffs remain in place and, quote, in full force and effect. He also announced he's imposing that 10% global tariff over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And as you said, this is that tariff under Section 122. It's a temporary tariff, and that provision gives the president the authority to impose a tariff of up to 15% for only 150 days. So can you add any clarity here to what the tariff situation looks like?
Sure. So we have existing tariffs on China that are grounded in Section 301 of the Trade Act, and those have been in place for quite some time. There are a number of other Section 301 investigations that are pending, including on shipbuilding and on semiconductors. And it was alluded to in the press conference that there's likely others that will be announced in the coming days. So Section 301 is pretty broad authority and allows for pretty significant tariffs when it comes to any act by a foreign country that burdens or restricts U.S. commerce. So pretty broad authority there. And I think that you could replace a lot of the IEPA tariffs that were struck down today using that authority alone. Other authority that's in effect now is Section 232 authority, and that's grounded in national security concerns. So we have a number of Section 232 duties in place on steel, aluminum, autos, and many other sectors. And I think about around a dozen 232 investigations that are pending and could be invoked again in order to replace the IEPA tariffs that were struck down. Now, Section 122 is a little known provision of trade law that has not been invoked in any recent time. And as you mentioned, it has some restrictions on it. It can only be in place for up to 150 days, and it's capped at 15%. At 150 days, it can only be renewed by an act of Congress. So that expiration date is in July, a couple of months before the midterms. I think that there's a big question there as to whether Congress would vote in favor of moving those forward. But how the president and Ambassador Greer designed the Section 122 tariffs, hopefully we'll find out more on that today, if not over the weekend. But it's possible that not every country will face that 10% additional tariff under Section 122, as that's really grounded in whether there's a balance of payments emergency. What is the significance of our trade deficit with that partner? So we could see some partners with the higher end of that and others at the lower end of that. So I think that there's a lot of question marks that are still out there that we'll find out soon, but there's definitely a lot of authorities that can step in the wake of this ruling.
And I want to talk about the second component when you said the story's not over, and it's the refund component. I'm curious what the heck that is going to look like. Who's getting the refunds? Is it the importers? What if they pass that on to the consumer? Is it the consumer? How do you untangle all of this? Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he did call this a mess. Seems like it's going to be. What does it look like?
It's too early to tell exactly what it's going to look like. Justice Kavanaugh was absolutely right. This could be extremely chaotic, but I don't think that it's impossible to do. And so we're going to be seeing how that gets untangled in the coming days. Is the lower court going to weigh in on this now that the case has been remanded for dismissal? Or is this going to fall into the administration's hands to try to figure out? I think that there's a couple of issues that we should be looking for. You named one of them, which is, what do you do when this has been passed on already to the consumer? Is the importer of record going to be entitled to that refund? And also, how is CBP going to figure out exactly which tariffs are IEEPA tariffs versus other types of tariffs? I think that there's a lot of questions around this. Could be mired in litigation for a very long time. And so we may not actually know where this all ends up for some time.
I'm curious, if I'm one of our trading partners right now, what exactly am I thinking? Because you're seeing President Trump saying there's other alternatives. Here they are. He listed them. The big headline out of that press conference is President Trump imposing that 10% temporary global tariff. But what are they thinking? And is this further fraying our relationship with our trading partners?
Well, if I was one of our trading partners, I would be on the phone immediately with the president and with Ambassador Greer and many other members of the cabinet. And I would be saying, we struck a deal, and I want to make sure that the deal that I struck when IEEPA was in place is the same type of deal that I'm going to get on the backside of this once replacement tariffs are put into effect. So I think a lot of those conversations are going to be happening. Assurances are going to have to be made. And then time will tell whether or not we're able to hold up those favorable terms for those countries who have stepped out and have signed agreements with this administration in the last 9 months. I think that there's going to have to be some level of back and forth over the coming weeks as potential new terms are negotiated. And other countries may still want to walk away. But the U.S. is a very large consumption market, and getting these deals nailed down is still going to be important. So I don't think we will see a mass exodus.
If I'm one of our trading partners, does this give me a leg up at the negotiating table? Am I looking at this Supreme Court decision and thinking, hey, this could get me a more favorable agreement? And then on the flip side, obviously, does this put the United States in a weaker position? Talk to us about that.
It certainly complicates matters. And depending on how the Section 122 is structured and how the administration moves forward with the Section 301 and Section 232 investigations, we could find ourselves with reduced leverage with our trading partners. But I think that this administration has probably been thinking about all of this for the last 9 months as it's been negotiating with partners. It's not been a secret that IEEPA tariffs were on the chopping block and that this could have been the result. So I guarantee that the smart people that are working over at USTR and elsewhere in the administration already have some contingency plans.
What do you think the economic impacts of all of this will be, whether or not we're getting those refunds? And as you said, that's probably tied up. It's not like we're going to see them tomorrow or anytime soon. The fact that temporary tariffs are going into place, other tariffs are out, some are in. What does this all do to the economy?
I think that the economy is going to have some volatility in the short term because we're waiting for certainty. We're waiting to see which new authorities are going to come into effect, what our trading partners are going to do, how that's going to impact the stock market, what is the impact going to be on importers of record, are U.S. taxpayers and consumers going to be paying less for, the goods that they are consuming in the market that are coming from our trading partners or not. In the long run, I don't see this having that big of an impact. I think that in terms of revenue generation, We're going to replace the revenue that we were bringing in with IEEPA tariffs with these new tariffs. I think that it's going to take a while for these refunds to work themselves out. So I don't think that that's going to be an immediate shock to the system. And I think that in general, we will find favorable terms with our trading partners again.
You're the trade expert, so I'm curious what specifically you're looking out for next, because it does seem to be a bit in a precarious position right now.
Yeah, I would be looking out for how the Section 122 tariffs are going to be structured. Will they be across the board for all trading partners, or will there be a calibration depending on who the partner is? So that's number one. Number two, I would be looking at what are the new sectors that are going to be implicated by new investigations on Section 301 and Section 232, because that is going to be focused on specific sectors and specific products. And so we'll have to see what happens there. And the last piece that I would be thinking about is how will these new tariffs interplay with the existing tariffs? We have a very complicated structure right now of how tariffs are stacking on top of one another. And then we have waivers and exemptions for certain products and certain countries. And all of that is now in flux. So I would be looking to see how that's going to play out as well, because that could have major impacts on the decisions that companies are making as to where they're going to be investing and where they're going to be manufacturing their products.
I appreciate you making sense of this a bit for us. And as we see developments on President Trump's tariffs, old and new, I hope you can come back on and join me. Sarah Stewart, you are welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much.